Today I'd like to show you how to answer a constructed response question using the method known as RACES. And we've talked about this in class, but if you haven't been in my class, basically this is for answering the kind of question that you're going to get in a normal classroom setting where the teacher asks you to read something and then to answer a question using terms like explain or discuss or list or summarize. They're always asking you to read something and then to write about it. And so this will probably be the most common kind of writing you'll do in your academic career all the way through. You're going to be asked to read something and then to prove that you learned from the reading by writing about it. So I want to give you a recipe for how it's done, and that's what this is. So a little explanation is right here using the RACES method. The R stands for restating the question using a sentence format. So I will show you the example. The question might be, why was Jim late? And all you have to do is take that section, why was Jim late, and you want to reuse the words. So the first sentence of any answer will just be reusing the words that was in the original question or prompt. In this case, we would start it by saying, Jim was late because. Then we'll answer the question about why he was late and basically just finish this sentence. And it might be something as simple as Jim was late because he missed the bus. So that would be the R and the A. The R is restating the question, and the answer of the question would be why. So basically, he is late because he missed the bus. Then you're going to cite evidence from the text that supports your answer. And so that's going to be something that you do by reading again. So basically, you're probably going to read this twice. The first time just to read it and familiarize yourself with it. And the second time, whatever you're trying to read, you read again, but you try to highlight or underline things. So in this case, you have to find some reasons why he missed the bus. And in the story or the writing, it will explain why he missed the bus. So you just highlight or underline those, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then you explain how your evidence proves your answer. And you basically say, this evidence shows me he missed the bus because, and then you say, he was late because he missed the bus. Or in conclusion, he was late because he missed the bus. Now this seems very simplistic, and it is, but that's the beauty of it. It's a simple method of answering constructed responses to build your response. So let's do one together, shall we? So this is one we use in class called Home on the Plains, and it's about something called a soddy, which is a house that was built about the 1880s out in the Great Plains. So what you're looking at here is the prompt. Before we even read it, here's the prompt. And the prompt says, a soddy had both positive and negative features, and describe these features by using details from the article. So the first thing we'll write is just a copy of the actual prompt question, which is, a soddy had both positive and negative features. Okay, and that works there. That's your answer for that. So that's your first sentence of your paragraph. And basically, you could say, my answer is, you're going to flip it a little bit, and you're going to say something simple like, the negative features were many, but the positive features made life possible on the plains. Now we're going to read it, and we're going to see what we can hunt for. So basically, that is my answer. So there you go. That's my first sentence or two. Sometimes those are both with single sentence. So now we're going to go back and find some positives and some negatives. And let's highlight them. Let's read. We've got to look for the positives and we've got to look for the negatives. So I'm going to use a highlighter, and I'm going to highlight everything positive in yellow. So, and then I'll go back and I'll highlight everything in negative in red. And I'm just going to read it through once. And it's going to be a little boring, but here it goes. This will show you how it's done. You have to hunt for positive and negative features, one sentence at a time. For women living on the Great Plains, the first shock was learning what sort of house they'd now be calling home. Well, that one doesn't actually tell me positive or negative. I would call that a neutral fact. It doesn't support or describe any positive or negatives. One girl recalled, when our covered wagon drew up beside the door of the one-roomed sod house that Father had provided, he helped Mother down, and I remember how her face looked as she gazed about that barren farm, then threw her arms about his neck and gave way to the only fit of weeping I ever remember her indulge in. Well, it says that Mama wasn't happy about that house, but it doesn't tell us a positive or a negative. And I suppose you could say the mom's reaction was negative, but we're not going to put that in there. This is still just very general information. Next sentence. Earth was the only real building material available in many parts of the plains. Well, that doesn't describe a soddy. It just tells us that they built it out of earth, really, but it really doesn't describe it. It's not positive or negative, so we're not going to use it. Sod bricks, cut into strips about 1 foot wide, 2 feet long, and 4 inches thick, were stacked grassy side down to form a one-room house. Well, that tells us how they built the soddy, but it doesn't tell us the positive or the negative. Each brick weighed about 50 pounds. Well, that sounds like kind of a negative, so I'm going to highlight that in red, and that each brick weighed about 50 pounds. Okay, we're going to keep reading. Boards laid over door and window openings supported more sod piled on top. Again, just describing. Loose dirt and mud filled in between the bricks. Again, it's just describing. Overhead, a frame of poles covered with brush and more sod made a roof, while underfoot was a floor of packed down earth. Again, it's telling us how it's built, but it's not telling us positives or negatives. The soddy offered protection and insulation against heat and cold. That is a big positive. So we're going to underline that or highlight that in a different color. It wouldn't burn during a deadly prairie fire. That's another real positive. It's nice to live in a house that doesn't burn. But the house was also damp and impossible to keep clean. Musty, too. So that's a negative. Women tacked up yards of muslin to catch sprinklings of dirt from the walls and ceilings. Well, it tells what they did, but it doesn't say if it's positive or negative. In rainstorms, the soddy dripped and ran with mud. That sounds pretty negative to me. So we'll do that as a negative. Mice, bugs, and snakes felt perfectly at home in a house made of dirt. Oh yeah, that's negative. One girl remembered from her pioneering childhood, sometimes the bull snakes would get in on the roof, and now and then one would lose his hold and fall down on the bed and then off on the floor. Mother would grab the hoe and there was something doing, and after the fight was over, Mr. Bullsnake was dragged outside. That's kind of cool, and you might want to use that. That's definitely a negative. For me, I would use that using like quotation marks around it if I wanted to. That's a way to get a 4, is to actually quote the text. So maybe I'll use that. But let's keep reading. From North Dakota down to Texas, the Western Plains often wore a desolate and lonely face, open, arid, and scoured by the wind. Well, it talks about the climate in Texas from North Dakota, but doesn't tell us about the soddy. But the land early pioneers avoided grew more attractive with the passage of the Homestead Act of 1862. That's interesting. I wonder what that's about. We don't know yet, and it's not about a soddy. The act allowed the head of a household to pay a small filing fee on a 160-acre claim at a government land office. Well, that's interesting, but doesn't really tell us much about a soddy. If the family lived on the claim and farmed it for 5 years, the land was theirs. I kind of think that's a positive, because when you think about it, 5 years and you get 160 free acres, that's pretty cool. So I'm going to highlight that. And the last sentence, usually men and women, but also some single and widowed women took up the challenge, which is interesting, but it doesn't really talk about it. So now I have some things highlighted up here, and I have some things in red and some things in yellow. The yellow is the positive, and the red is the negative. All I need to do now to write my whole paragraph is look at that. So I know what I'm going to do, and I'm going to just start writing them down. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about the positive and the negative. And really what I want to do here is I want to have 3 positives and 3 negatives if I can handle it. So I'm going to just make a little sentence over here, see what I can do. I'm just going to type, and it's going to say, the first one that I want to talk about is going to be the positives. And I'm going to say the Saudi offered insulation against the intense heat and deep cold of the prairies. That was a positive. Oh, I better spell intense right. And then I'm going to say, the next sentence will be, the Saudi also didn't burn in the deadly prairie fires, P-R-A-I-R-E, there we go, that often roared across the land. See, I'm just putting a few words in there to make it my own, kind of paraphrasing it. This meant it was warm and safe and kept the family alive in a hard climate. I also might say, if the family lived there for 5 years, they owned the land and the Saudi. Another thing you might even say is the dirt was free, right? Now, I'm going to take this organizer, and I'm not going to explain over here. I've been explaining here. So now I'm just going to make sure you understand what I did. I'm going to use this as my positive. And over here, I'm going to use my negative. So I'm kind of just hacking this organizer because it's not exactly what I needed, but I know over here I need the negatives. I'm going to start writing here, and I'm going to say that there were many negative aspects to a Saudi.
Excuse the interruption, but could I please announce that all soccer games are postponed for today? All soccer games are postponed for today.
It's just like being in school. Okay. The bricks that made the Saudi were very heavy at 50 pounds each, making it hard to build. Also, when it rained, the rain dripped through the roof as mud onto the floor. The Saudi was hard to keep clean, smelled musty, and small animals and insects often found their way inside. Okay? So now I'm nearly done. All I need to do is restate my topic sentence. And basically, I look back at it and I'm just going to say it had positive and negative features. So I'm going to say this. Though the Saudi had many positive and negative features, it was a house made of free materials, and if you could manage to live in it for 5 years, you owned 160 acres of prime farmland. And I think that's pretty good. So all I would need to do now, and I've basically written my response, is copy and paste that whole thing into a document, and I'm done. And that is an interesting thing. I want to show you before we keep going, though, that is how you write this. So to review with you, the first thing you do is remind yourself what the RACES stands for. So RACES is restate, answer, cite evidence, explain, and sum it up. You read, and as you read, the first thing you write, of course, is your first sentence. You get that from the prompt to the question. Then you look at what they want. In this case, they wanted positive and negatives of a Saudi. So you go back and you hunt for them, and you highlight or you underline or you circle. You write on the actual reading. That's essential. You have to have a copy you can write on or highlight on a computer. And then when that's done, after you've written it all, you just copy and paste all of this into a document and you're done. Or you write it on paper, I guess, and that's another thing you do. So this would be, I wanted to show you what a 3 would look like. What we just wrote was actually a really strong 3. This would be a weak 3. One positive feature of a soddy was that the soddy offered protection. I know this because in the story it says the soddy offered protection and insulation against the heat and cold. It wouldn't burn during a deadly prairie fire. But a downside was that it was damp. It says, but the house was also damp, musty, and impossible to keep clean. What you want to be able to do is answer the question and then pull evidence from the writing into your own answer. So you're just hunting for information the author's already given you and restating it. You can even copy it word for word and use quotation marks in the form of a direct quote. It's really that simple. But it is a recipe that you should be using. This is just one example of how it's done, and we're going to be doing more of these. And I hope that you guys got something from this impromptu video, because I'm sorry you're home and that you have to watch this way and not with me so I can answer your questions, but I think this will help. All right, stay safe.